Prehistoric psychology. So, psychology of what are we talking about? Psychology of, you know, man before they could actually document? Are we talking about psychology of dinosaurs? Or of the literal protein strains that were in the primordial soup, making up every living thing as we now know it? Even water bears. I wonder how long tardigrades have been around. I mean, they can, at least theoretically, survive for an indeterminate amount of time in the vacuum of space, in volcanoes, under great atmospheric pressure. It's a wonder that they've developed that kind of immunity. Gosh, back in the dinosaur days, there's all sorts of lovely dinosaurs, and a lot of them probably had, shapes that we can only guess at. I mean, they've determined that apparently velociraptors, at least some kinds, that doesn't mean that all of them do, but velociraptors have feathers. Feathered velociraptors, that seems like it would be a lot of fun. I'm a big fan of velociraptors myself, definitely an interesting hunting animal. Tend to run in packs, no lone wolves among them, as it were. But they would be very organized, just like wolves are. Domestication of at least something that came after the velociraptors, what ended up getting to the chicken. I wonder if chickens have any sort of innate pack animal qualities. That would be very interesting. So the prompt for the A meeting that I did today was what rock bottom is like. And I think honestly, rock bottom is very suggestive or subjective. Sorry. And that, I mean, you could think that you've hit rock bottom at some point, and then figure out that rock bottom is nowhere near as bad as something that happened later in your life. I've definitely had a couple of things that I considered rock bottom. Hell, I was homeless for a little bit of time. I was, I'd ended up in the hospital due to my drinking on several occasions. I had a seizure one time. That was the most recent rock bottom. So, yeah, that was definitely no fun. But, it could always be worse. It does almost make you wonder sometimes if death is actually worse. But I'm not here to talk about death. That's a little too disturbing and depressing. Things could always be worse. I wonder how hunting in packs really came about and what had to happen in order to get to that kind of mindset. Because it doesn't seem like anything could just innately be a pack animal, like depending on other things in order to help itself. You gotta think, any sort of life form, that's sufficiently advanced enough is only thinking of itself. When you think about the protozoa, uh, the prokaryotes and stuff like that that inhabited the earth far before we did, they only did things that furthered themselves. But then when things got, when conditions became a little bit harder for those prokaryotes, they did decide to work in tandem and ended up becoming a more advanced organism because of it. It ended up going from a mutually beneficial relationship into becoming something that was greater than the sum of its parts. And through that kind of evolution, you get what we know and love today. Get dogs. I love dogs. Dogs are great. Another example of a pack animal. Very domesticated nowadays, but I mean, you do have certain places where there are wild dogs and stuff, and they very much hunt and pack animals. I remember in The Witcher, one of the early quests, it's just like one of the first things that you do. You're trying to find one hunter, and he's trying to hunt these packs of wild dogs and saying that they're worse than wolves. Definitely is understandable. They don't really care about their prey and will ultimately be more selfish than do things for the good of the pack. I mean, of course, they'll all work together, but if any of them can get an edge on the other, mating, food-wise, just resource-wise in general, then they're gonna take it. Whereas wolves tend to be a little bit more social animals. They do have a hierarchy, but they do tend to be a little bit more, respectful of each other. Wolves are definitely something that have been around for a while. Maybe not as long as, alligators and crocodiles, but, some of the earliest records we have of humanity are the domestication of wolves. Watch the movie Alpha, which was, it itself was an okay movie. I would give it a solid 7 out of 10. But they had a whole, 10-minute scene at the beginning where they showed something that was going to happen later in the film. And it was, the whole thing. And then later on in the film, when they got to that point, they showed all of it again. What they could have done was sat there and, showed small parts of it so you'd be like, oh yeah, this is happening. No, they decided to show that whole thing all over again, up until a certain point. Won't ruin anything for you, because you should watch it, but it was not so good, as it were. I hate saying that, because, I try to be respectful of anybody's movies. It's not easy to make a movie. I've definitely tried to write scripts and stuff like that, and even that just takes time and effort that is a little bit harder to do. Even if you have a planned out storyboard and everything like that, trying to fill in the details and trying to get enough to make a viable movie is just a bit rough in itself. Anyway, back to prehistoric psychology. Gosh. The flying dinosaurs, I need to brush up on my dinosaur biology a little bit better, because there's all sorts of different dinosaurs that existed through a period of several millions of years. So I may not be the best to talk about this kind of thing, but you know, it doesn't stop me from talking about it. But you know, even in an instinctual animal, they do feel certain emotions, like fear, desperation, happiness, pleasure, boredom. God, I know I've seen plenty of animals nowadays that are just bored as hell. You know, sometimes I see them in zoos and stuff like that, and I'm not trying to talk down about, you know, at least a fair amount of zoos that are publicly funded and, you know, put a lot of that money towards the animals and not necessarily just profiting off of them. Because they do try to take care of them to the best of their ability, and they can only give them so much space and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, it's not the kind of environment that's really viable for animals to really be happy in. Like, if you ever see lions at the zoo and stuff like that, lions love to do a lot of different things. They love to play with each other, they love to, you know, lay out in the sun. They're just big cats after all. But, you know, even domestic cats love to hunt. Now, how many times have you seen a lion get to chase down live prey? And if you have seen it, let me know, because I want to see it right now. But I mean in a zoo. I mean, you can find videos of that online all day. I wonder what was so specific about the crocodiles that caused them to be able to survive the test of time, to become an apex predator, amongst other things. I think it's because they just developed habits that really set themselves apart from anyone else. They tend to inhabit ecosystems where they don't have much opposition for resources. They have the ability to kind of blend in, kind of look like logs if you're not looking at them carefully. They're much quicker than people give them credit for. They have a bite force that is insane. Like, if you're getting bit by a crocodile, that's not the worst thing you have to worry about, but you're pretty much done at that point. The crocodiles have also developed a method where they spin around with their prey. I mean, causing the prey to, you know, separate, for lack of a more gross term, and, you know, completely just disorient the prey so they can't escape in general. I don't know about crocodiles being very social animals, although, you know, I've seen them have mutually beneficial relationships with different kinds of animals. Or just animals that they really don't mind hanging around, because they're not easy enough for them to get to, or they just don't really see any reason to, you know, bother them, because they're not bothering it. Man, T-Rex. Can you imagine if the T-Rex was actually a pack animal? A lot of herbivores and stuff like that, you know, had to be almost obligatory pack animals because it's easier to survive in a herd than it is just by yourself. Because in a herd you have, you know, the sick, the elderly, the ones who natural selection are pretty much saying, okay, you're done, it's time for you to go. And you know, it's a really terrible way of looking at it, but that's what happened. And I think that's part of the problem with society right now, is that there's no natural selection. People are living longer than they ever have. And that's why, they have food crises, why we've had to instill preservatives and things like that in order to make sure that everybody has enough. And I have to move beyond the idea that everybody can get plenty, because that's just not going to happen. We have a population that's nearly, if not over, 8 billion strong at this point. That's a lot of freaking people. God, it was about 100 years ago that we only had about 1 billion people on this earth, and it's just skyrocketed since then. But it's not surprising. What with the extrapolation of technologies and stuff like that, we've been able to make advances far quicker than, than anything else. We have no natural predators. We have all sorts of access to different resources, even though we are burning through them at an exponentially larger rate as time goes on. And we don't... We've been living longer than we ever have. Average lifespan just keeps going up, and if you have the money, your lifespan could be much longer than even the average person's. There are a lot of problems with society right now, at least American society. I'm not saying that I don't like America, because it definitely has its perks, as long as you're healthy, not below the poverty line, and, just... if you happen to be of a white European descent that's not Irish, then life is pretty good for you. But other people have had struggles. And that's just a polite way of putting it. It's far worse than that, but atrocities happen every day to a lot of different people. And there's really just not much done about it, especially with social media being the way it is, and the newses want to just elicit an emotional reaction rather than reporting just news. And it's a biased emotional reaction too. It's being used so that they can get reactions from both the side that they represent and the opposite side, and violent reactions of those kind of things. Because the whole reason for the two-party system is that it's easier to pass legislation that you need to pass while the people are fighting each other, and nobody's paying attention to exactly what's going on. Sure, you have some people reporting on it, you have whistleblowers and things like that, but how many people do you actually know that are up to date on all those things? Hell, I'm not even as up to date as I would like to be on those things. And part of my reason for that is my lackadaisical nature, as well as my lack of caring for current politics. I would love to see American government overthrown and have something better put in its place. With how we understand sociology at this point, our access to the different resources and technologies and stuff like that, we can make something that far outweighs and exceeds what we currently have. But we're using these current methods that are so outdated, but they just keep updating them. Instead of enacting new systems, they just keep updating the old things. That's why you have systems that take forever freaking long in the bureaucratic process when they could be automated. That's why you have websites that are so terrible to interact with that it just frustrates people before they can even get nearly to where they're trying to. And that's why you have things like, income tax and stuff like that being so wibbly wobbly that, you know, just before they decide to let everybody do their taxes and stuff like that, certain legislation expired and certain other things that they wanted went into effect so that they can give less back to the average person. Like the employee income credit. Something like that. I forget what it is. But basically, you know, if you make below a certain amount, which when I did my taxes it was 16,000, I don't make that little per year. I did last year, but this year I did not. And because of that, my taxes were almost cut in half. And then I got screwed in other ways, but that's more the jobs I worked fault than my taxes themselves. But you know, they need to come out with more detailed reports of what exactly they're using the taxes on, and I'm sure that you could find that information in some form or another, but the process to get that information is long, grueling, and almost not worth it because it doesn't tell you enough information to actually be in itself information. Alright, I'm done talking about that.